Kieran North hated the rain, especially when it came out of nowhere, and drenched his $5,000 suit on the one day he didn't have his driver waiting. "Are you kidding me?" he muttered under his breath, standing on the curb of a sleepy downtown street as the sky cracked open like it had a personal vendetta. Thick drops hit his shoulders, soaking through the fine wool of his charcoal blazer while people hurried past him with umbrellas. Of course, he didn't have one. His jet-black hair was already clinging to his forehead when a voice called out, "Hey, you're gonna drown standing there like that." Kieran turned, blinking rain out of his eyes. A woman stood in the open doorway of a small bookstore, holding a large canvas tote over her head like a makeshift shield. She was barefoot, her boots sitting just inside the door, and she looked at him like he was the one who had lost his mind. "Get in here before you catch pneumonia," she said again, her tone bossy but not unkind. He hesitated. He didn't know this woman. He didn't go into random shops without his assistant knowing his schedule. But the wind shoved the rain harder against his back and the thunder cracked above him again. He stepped inside. Warmth hit him first, the scent of cinnamon and old pages second. The woman dropped her tote and reached for a towel from behind the front desk, tossing it to him. "Not your best day, huh?" Kieran caught the towel mid-air. "You could say that." She turned back to the counter, busying herself with a stack of books. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She wore a faded blue sweater that looked a size too big and jeans with paint smudges on the knees. "I'm Tessa Lively," she said, not looking at him. "Owner, librarian, cashier, and part-time therapist for most of the people who wander in." He blinked. "You own this place?" "Yep, 4 years this fall." She finally looked at him. "You good to stand, or are you gonna pass out dramatically and ruin my carpet?" Kieran let out a low laugh, the first real one he'd had in days. "I think I'll survive." He glanced around. The place was small but charming, with mismatched armchairs, glowing lamps, and handwritten shelf labels. "Name?" she asked, already pulling a mug from under the counter. He hesitated, choosing for once not to lead with his last name. "Kieran." She nodded like she didn't recognize it, which was rare. "Coffee or tea?" "Coffee, black." "Yeah, figured," she said, disappearing into the back. Kieran looked around again. The last 24 hours had been hell boardroom fights, legal threats, a hostile takeover attempt he had to kill before it spread. And now he was here, dripping on a hardwood floor and being offered coffee by a woman who didn't care who he was. Tessa came back with a steaming mug, sliding it across the countertop. "Here, you look like you've had a week." He took it, their fingers brushing for half a second. "You're not going to ask what I do?" "I don't usually interrogate people who look like soaked golden retrievers." He stared at her, then laughed again. "You're different." "Yeah, I get that a lot." They sat in silence for a moment. Rain smacked against the storefront windows, but inside it was quiet, safe. Kieran sipped the coffee. It was strong, not too bitter. He didn't know what to do with that. "I should go," he said, setting the mug down after a few minutes. "It's still pouring," she said plainly. "You're not going to get far unless you're trying to swim home." "I'll call someone." She raised an eyebrow. "Your phone's soaked. It probably died." He pulled it out and tapped the screen. "Dead." Tessa smiled like she'd won something. "We close at 6. You're welcome to hang out until then. Or if you're one of those can't sit still for 5 minutes types, I can put you to work." He looked at her like she was speaking another language. "Work? Yeah. These books don't shelve themselves, and I'm short-staffed today." "I don't shelve books." "Yeah, well, I don't usually offer shelter to strangers either, but here we are," she said lightly. Something about her, maybe the no-nonsense tone, maybe the way she didn't fawn over him, maybe the fact she hadn't once asked what kind of car he drove, made him set the coffee down and say, "Fine, show me." She handed him a small stack of paperbacks and pointed. "Fiction. Alphabetical. Don't mess it up." Kieran took the books, walked over to the back wall, and started reading the labels. He didn't know why he was doing this. Maybe because she hadn't judged him. Maybe because this place felt like a strange pocket of calm in a world that always demanded more. Maybe because she was beautiful in that effortless, too real to be fake way. Hours passed without him noticing. The rain eased, then returned. They worked in quiet rhythm, her sorting, him shelving, both of them occasionally trading comments that made the other laugh. By the time she flipped the sign to closed, he wasn't ready to leave. Tessa walked to the door, holding it open. "You dry enough to survive the walk to wherever you're going," he looked at her. "Actually, I was wondering if I could see you again." She blinked. "You don't even know me. I know you gave me shelter without asking for anything, and I know I haven't laughed like that in weeks." Tessa tilted her head, considering. "I close early on Sundays. Come by then." He smiled genuinely, not the one he wore at board meetings. "I will." She handed him the umbrella she kept by the door. "You'll need this." He stepped out onto the wet sidewalk, and for the first time in a long time, the rain didn't bother him. As he walked away, he didn't hear her whisper, "You're different too, Kieran." Sunday arrived with a crisp breeze and streaks of late afternoon sun cutting between the buildings. Kieran stood outside the bookstore, his driver idling a discreet distance away in the black Maybach. He adjusted the cuffs of his navy button-down and stared at the door, unsure why his chest felt tight. He'd closed 2 international deals this morning and hadn't blinked. But this was different. He pushed the door open. The scent inside had changed today. It was lemon and clove, subtle but distinct. Tessa stood behind the counter, tying a knot into the waistband of her linen apron with one hand while balancing a stack of worn hardcovers with the other. "You came," she said, not surprised, just acknowledging. "You said to," Kieran replied, stepping inside. "I also told someone last week to stop feeding the alley cats and they didn't listen, so I wasn't holding my breath." He nodded at the book she was carrying. "Need help?" "Nope." "You're not getting out of whatever reason you're here for by pretending to be useful." He leaned a hand on the counter, watching her shelve the titles without hesitation. "I wanted to talk to you." "About?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around. No one else was in the shop. "Last week wasn't normal for me." Tessa looked over her shoulder. "Rain catching you off guard?" "No, this place. I needed it more than I realized." She finished with the last book and turned fully to face him. "Okay, but you're still not saying what you want." "I want to know you," he said simply. Tessa blinked, and for the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not fear, not discomfort, just wariness. "That's a sentence people usually save for after dinner." "Then let me take you to one." She folded her arms. "You're not the type who eats at places with paper napkins, are you? I could surprise you." "Try," she said, walking past him toward the back room. "I've got one condition." "What is it?" "You don't try to impress me," he followed, pausing at the threshold. "What if I'm not trying?" "Then we'll be fine." The next evening, they met again, this time outside a restaurant tucked between 2 brownstones, with no sign and only one flickering lantern above the door. Tessa arrived exactly on time, wearing a charcoal gray coat and boots that looked like they'd seen real seasons. She approached him with an arched brow. "You didn't bring a driver?" Left him 2 blocks away. "Impressive." "I thought I wasn't allowed to do that." She gave a small nod. "I'll allow it this once." Inside, the place was dimly lit, full of low voices and flickering candles. No menus. The host greeted Kieran with a respectful nod and led them to a corner booth, half hidden by a velvet curtain. Tessa looked around. "How do they know what you want?" "They don't." "They know what's good." She leaned back. "So you're a regular." "I've only been here twice." "Why bring me?" "Because you said not to impress you. This place isn't about that. It's about slowing down." Something in her face softened. "You don't do that often, do you?" "Not until recently." Dinner arrived in courses that neither of them had requested: roasted duck with blood orange glaze, wild mushrooms in thyme butter, bread that was still warm from the oven. Tessa didn't ask prices. She didn't reel from the luxury. She just tasted, commented, and once closed her eyes and said, "Okay, that's unfairly good." Kieran leaned in. "You cook?" "I do," she said, sipping her wine. "Nothing fancy, but it's mine. My mom taught me." He tilted his head. "She around?" "Not anymore," she said, not offering more. "You?" raised by someone paid to be there. That sounds lonely. It was efficient. She nodded like she understood more than she was letting on. You ever want something different sometimes, he said. But then I meet someone who makes me think I still could. Tessa set her fork down, her gaze sharp now. You don't even know me. You think I'm here because I don't want to? No, she said. I think you're used to people folding themselves into what you need. And you won't, not even a little, he smiled. Good. They walked out into the night with no umbrella between them. The rain had held off, but the air was damp and the city lights cast reflections over the wet pavement. Tessa didn't flinch when Kieran reached for her hand. She let it happen, her fingers slipping between his like they'd belonged there all along. I wasn't expecting this, she said suddenly, voice low. Neither was I. They paused at the edge of the sidewalk where the street narrowed and the city turned quieter. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, fading fast. I don't usually let people in fast, she murmured. So don't screw it up. I won't. You say that like it's a promise. It is. She looked at him then, really looked. Who are you, Kieran? He hesitated, then reached into his coat and handed her a business card. She turned it over, reading the gold embossed letters. Her eyes widened. You're Kieran North. North Ventures, the one who, yes, she blinked, stunned for the first time since he'd met her. I wanted you to know before you found out from someone else, he said. I didn't lie, I just liked being someone else for a little while. Tessa didn't speak for several long seconds, then she handed the card back. I don't care how many zeros are in your portfolio, she said. But if you ever lie to me, we're done. I won't. Good, she said, and turned, walking toward the subway without another word. He watched her go, heart thudding, knowing he hadn't just stepped into something real, he'd leapt. Kieran stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse bathroom, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jaw tight as his reflection stared back at him. The city lights behind him glittered through the glass like a million tiny secrets, but none of them answered the one question that had been gnawing at him for the last 3 days. Why did it matter so much what she thought? He'd had business partners walk out on billion-dollar deals without losing sleep. But the way Tessa's voice had gone quiet after reading his card, the way she'd handed it back like it weighed something, he couldn't forget it. He'd spent the last 3 days combing through international acquisitions, handling a crisis in Zurich, and approving a groundbreaking AI partnership, yet her was the only face that lived in his head. He ran a hand through his hair and turned away from the mirror. Downstairs, the penthouse was silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a stormy skyline. He picked up his phone and stared at it. She hadn't reached out, not that he'd expected her to. She didn't chase anything, not even when it intrigued her. He grabbed his coat. The bookstore's lights were still on when he arrived, the familiar golden glow spilling onto the sidewalk. She was inside alone, organizing a display of vintage poetry collections. She didn't look up when the door swung open. You're late, she said without turning. I wasn't aware I had an appointment. You don't, she replied, reaching for a small brass bookend. But you're here, so let's not waste time. He stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. I've been thinking about what you said. Tessa finally looked up, her expression unreadable. Which part? That you don't let people in fast, that you don't want to be lied to. Her hands paused on the shelf. You lied by omission. I'm still deciding if that's forgivable. I didn't want you to see me the way the rest of the world does. You mean as a man who buys failing companies and turns them into corporate machines? His jaw tensed. That's not all I do. Maybe not, she allowed, but that's what you're known for. You walk into a room and people either want to become you or survive you. He stepped closer. And you, I'm still deciding. The silence between them pulsed with something unspoken. I've never done this, he said finally. Done what? Chased someone who wasn't already chasing me. Tessa leaned against the edge of the counter, arms crossed. I'm not interested in being pursued for the sake of it. I'm not pursuing you to win. Then why are you here? Because something about you makes me want to be quieter. Better, honest. Her eyes didn't soften, but her voice did. That's not something you say to impress someone. I'm not trying to impress you. She studied him for a long moment. Then, you want to see where I grew up, he blinked. Now. She grabbed her coat from the hook and locked the front door behind them. They took her car, a dented hatchback with an air freshener shaped like a lemon hanging from the mirror. Kieran didn't comment. He sat in the passenger seat, watching her navigate the streets like she'd memorized them with her bones. They drove until the city thinned, and the buildings gave way to rows of narrow houses with peeling paint and sagging fences. She parked in front of a small blue duplex. My grandparents raised me here after my mom passed, she said, not looking at him. They owned the corner diner 2 blocks down, and now, gone, both of them. The diner's a vape shop now. He didn't ask if it hurt. The way she gripped the steering wheel told him enough. I used to sit on the porch steps and read, she said. Even in winter, my grandfather said stories were the only thing that kept the cold from getting into your chest. He turned to her. You still believe that? I have to. She finally looked at him. I brought you here because I wanted you to see what matters to me, she said. Not suits, not private dining rooms, places that remember things. People who don't pretend. Kieran glanced out the window. A kid on a scooter flew past, laughing like the world was still simple, then back to her. I want to know what you remember, he said, voice low. Tessa's breath caught for half a second. Come on, she said. I'll show you the diner or what's left of it. They walked the 2 blocks in silence. The streetlights buzzed overhead, and every few feet she nodded at a mailbox, a stoop, a broken gate, each one a memory she didn't say aloud. When they reached the shop, she stopped in front of the window. The neon sign inside flickered erratically. Used to be red booths and chrome counters, she said. My grandma made the best peach pie in the county. People came from 2 towns over. Kieran looked at her, not the building. What happened to the recipe? Tessa smiled faintly. In a notebook in my kitchen. Somewhere between the cookbooks and the overdue bills. He took a breath. I want to see it. The notebook or the kitchen? Both. She didn't respond, just turned and started walking back. Inside her apartment, the space was small but alive. Plants crowded the windowsill. A chipped mug held pencils near the sink, and the walls were lined with more books than furniture. She pulled a slim notebook from a cabinet beside the fridge and handed it to him. He opened it carefully. Her grandmother's slanted handwriting filled the pages. Butter-stained corners, notes in the margins, a life captured in sugar and flour. He set it down. You should open a bakery, she laughed short and real. With what money I could fund it. Tessa's smile vanished. And oh, you? No, partner, silent. No strings. I don't believe in no strings. Then we'll make new terms. She stared at him, this man who didn't belong in her world yet somehow fit into it like a missing piece she hadn't known she'd lost. I don't want to be a project, she said. You're not, or a distraction. You're the only thing in my life that's not, she exhaled slowly. You're saying all the right things. I'm not trying to. She looked at him for a long time, then she stepped closer, reached up and touched his face. Not a kiss, not yet. Just her palm on his cheek, grounding him. You're not what I expected, she whispered. He leaned into her hand. Neither are you. They didn't speak for the rest of the night. They didn't have to. Tessa's fingers trailed along the spine of a book on her nightstand. Her thoughts tangled somewhere between the scent of cinnamon hanging in the air and the memory of Kieran's voice from the night before. He hadn't stayed, hadn't even asked, but the echo of his presence lingered like the aftertaste of something decadent. Real, unavoidable. It wasn't just the way he looked at her now, like he had nothing to hide. It was the quiet shift beneath it, the subtle way his shoulders had relaxed when she let him in when she hadn't walked away. The next morning, a knock came just after sunrise. She opened the door in an oversized flannel shirt and wool socks, blinking against the pale light seeping in from the hallway. Kieran stood there holding a pastry box and a small bouquet of wildflowers that didn't match. No roses, no arrangement, just whatever he'd picked himself. I didn't know what you'd want, he said, offering the box. So I got everything. She took the box, then the flowers, her fingers brushing his. "You went to a bakery." I waited outside until they opened. "I didn't know you knew how to wait." "I'm learning." She stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was still quiet, the kettle not yet on, but he moved through it like it was a place he belonged in. He set the flowers in a chipped mason jar near the window, then leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. "I have a proposal," he said when she sat cross-legged on the couch and opened the box. "Does it involve you buying my entire life and turning it into a luxury resort?" "No," he said. "It involves you and me and a contract." She raised an eyebrow. "You brought a contract?" "No." "But I had one drafted." She set the croissant down. "Kieran, that's not romantic, that's terrifying. It's not about romance." She tilted her head. "That's worse. It's about the bakery, your grandmother's recipes, your name on the awning, full creative control. I fund it, but you run it." Completely, she blinked. "Why?" "Because you deserve to build something that matters to you, and because I can help. That's the only reason I'm offering, no strings, not even my name on the receipts." She stared at him. "People don't do things like this without expecting something." "I do." She stood, crossing to him slowly. "You don't need to prove anything to me, Kieran." "I'm not trying to prove, I'm trying to give." He reached into his coat pocket and held out a small silver key. "I bought the old corner store, the one where the diner used to be." She froze. "You what?" "I know what it meant to you. I know what could happen if it became something again." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked fast. "You didn't even ask." "I didn't want to ask. I wanted to give it back." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say." She took the key slowly as if it might vanish. "You're insane." "Completely." She exhaled, then laughed soft, full of disbelief. "If I say yes, if I really do this." "I don't want to owe you." "You won't, but I want to be there for it, every part of it." "As what?" "Whatever you'll let me be." She stepped closer, her hands resting on his chest. "You want to be in my life. I already am." Her lips touched his before either of them had time to think. No hesitation. No thunderstorm. Just sunlight through a window and the smell of sugar and fresh ink. When they pulled back, she didn't move far. "I can't promise I won't lose it sometimes. I can't promise I won't show up with too much, but you'll show up, always." She traced the edge of his jaw with her thumb. "Okay, then yes. We do this." That evening, she stood in front of the corner shop, keys in hand, flanked by her closest friends and a few former neighbors who had wandered back when they heard the news. The front had been cleaned but not remodeled. The original tile was still visible beneath the dust. The door creaked the same way it had when she was 10. Kieran stood beside her in a wool coat, no tie, just the kind of quiet presence that didn't ask for attention but always drew it. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "You sure you want to tie yourself to this?" "I'm not tying myself to the shop." She looked at him, puzzled. "I'm tying myself to you." And then, in front of the people who mattered, he dropped to one knee, not with a velvet box, with her grandmother's silver ring. "I had it resized," he said. "I found it in the back of your notebook. I thought you might want to wear it again, but this time, for something new." She covered her mouth with one hand, the other trembling as she reached for him. "You're serious." "I've never been more, Kieran. I know it's sudden. But nothing about this has ever been slow. You walked into my life like a storm, and now I don't want to live in any version where you're not in it." She laughed through tears. "You're insane." "You already said that." She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face. "Then yes." "Yes." He kissed her before the cheers even started, before the first photo was taken, before the bakery was built or the ribbon was cut. Because in that moment, with her laughter in his mouth and her hands tangled in his shirt, Kieran North, the man who owned everything, realized there was only one thing he'd ever truly wanted, her. And now he had her. Not in spite of the rain that had ruined his suit, but because of it. Because sometimes the storm doesn't wash things away. Sometimes it leads you home. Tessa leaned over the stainless steel counter, tying the final ribbon around a box of warm apple scones. The scent of browned butter and cinnamon floated through the newly finished bakery, Blending with the hum of soft music playing from the antique radio she'd insisted on keeping near the register. Outside, a fresh dusting of snow settled over the sidewalk, the world hushed and silvered. "Doors open in 5, called a voice from the back kitchen. "I know," she replied, not bothering to hide the nerves in her voice. "Don't remind me." Kieran walked in, rolling up the sleeves of his forest gray shirt, his fingers dusted with flour. "You've already got a line forming down the block." "You really think they're coming for me?" She looked up, a slow grin forming as she handed him the box. "They're coming for the scones. You're just the eye candy behind the counter." He set the box aside and reached for her waist instead, pulling her in until her apron brushed against his. "You sure it's not the other way around?" "Positive," she said, planting a quick kiss at the corner of his mouth. "Now go make yourself useful. The espresso machine still isn't behaving." He let her go reluctantly, the heat of his touch lingering in the air as he moved back toward the espresso bar. The place buzzed, now staff moving with practiced ease, pastry displays gleaming under warm lights, and the soft creak of the front door as it opened for the very first time. By noon, half the shelves were empty, and the glass case held only a few lonely chocolate croissants. A little girl in a red scarf pressed her nose to the display, and Tessa leaned down to offer her the last one before her mother could even ask. "On the house," she whispered. From behind the counter, Kieran watched her, his expression unreadable. When she finally made her way back to him, cheeks flushed and hair coming a little loose from its knot, he reached behind the register and pulled out a small box. "What's this?" she asked, brushing powdered sugar from her fingertips. "Something I've been working on," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a delicate bracelet, silver with a single charm, a miniature book with her initials etched on the spine. Her eyes softened. "You made this." "I had it made, but the design, yeah, that was mine." She traced the charm with her thumb. "You've been busy." "I've been thinking," he said. "About what comes next? For the bakery? For us?" She looked up sharply. "You're not about to suggest we open a second location already, are you?" "No," he said, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I'm suggesting we go here." She unfolded the itinerary. Her eyes scanned the details: a 2-week trip to southern France, a cooking school tucked along the coast, a villa rented for just the two of them. "You want to leave this place 2 weeks after opening?" "I want to build something else with you," Kieran said. "This place is your dream." "But we're allowed to have more than one." She blinked, overwhelmed for a moment. "You're serious?" "I already cleared it with your staff. The team's solid. And I figured you wouldn't mind a little inspiration for your next menu." "I can't believe you planned this without me noticing." "I've had practice hiding things in plain sight," he said, then added quickly, "this time for good reasons." She set the bracelet on the counter and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You're ridiculous. Only for you." That night, the bakery closed with the last customer lingering by the fire, clutching a steaming mug of cider. Tessa stood by the window, watching snow fall in soft waves against the lamplight. Kieran came up behind her, arms slipping around her waist. "Do you ever think," she started, "if it hadn't rained that day, I'd still be storming through life without a clue what I was missing?" He finished. She smiled. "Exactly." He kissed the back of her neck. "I'd have found you. One way or another. I'm glad the universe sped things up." He turned her to face him, his voice quieter now. "I want you to know something, okay? I don't miss the boardrooms. I don't miss the noise. I thought I would, but I don't." "Not even a little." She brushed his hair back from his forehead. "You really gave it up, all of it. The public side, the press. North Ventures is still mine, but I'm not its face anymore. I don't need to be." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for the light switch and dimmed the last overhead bulb. The bakery glowed with warmth, the street outside fading into a soft blur. "Come home," she whispered. "I already am," he said, and kissed her. They spent the next week preparing for the trip, closing the bakery for just long enough to let anticipation build. Handing off responsibilities to the eager, capable staff Tessa had trained herself. The night before they left, she stood in the upstairs apartment, suitcase half packed, staring at the postcard pinned to her mirror. A note scrawled in looping handwriting read, "Keep telling stories, even the messy ones." She didn't remember who had sent it, maybe her grandmother. Maybe a customer from years ago, but it felt like a promise now. Kieran stepped into the room, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I booked the cooking class," he murmured. "But I have a feeling we'll spend more time making a mess than mastering soufflés." "That's the point," she said, tilting her head against his. "Life's better when it's a little messy." He kissed her temple. "Remind me to spill flour on purpose." "Only if you clean it up." They laughed, the sound echoing softly off the walls that had once been filled with silence. And when the plane took off the next morning, hands clasped and hearts wide open, it was no longer about what they had left behind. It was about what they were building together, always.